Saint Norbert of Xanten was born into a noble family of the Lower Rhine region circa 1075, although other accounts place his birth around 1080. His birthplace is commonly recorded as Xanten, in present-day North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany, although some sources also place his birth in Gennep, now in the Netherlands. He was the son of Heribert, Count of Gennep. Norbert was educated at the Collegiate Church of St. Victor in Xanten, and later became a canon and a subdeacon. His noble birth, clerical education, personal gifts, and natural charm opened the way for Norbert to enter the powerful circles of the medieval world. He served as a chaplain within the household of Frederick, Archbishop of Cologne, and later at the court of Emperor Henry V. Although he belonged to the clergy, in his youth he was still drawn to the worldly life of these elite courts. His spiritual life had not yet grown fervent, and he was still swayed by ambition, comfort, and the attractions of a privileged life. Yet God had another plan for Norbert. Around the year 1115, as he was riding on the road to Frieden, identified with the town now known as Vreden, a violent storm suddenly arose. A bolt of lightning struck the ground before him, throwing Norbert from his horse and leaving him unconscious for about an hour. When he regained consciousness, he was shaken to the depths of his soul, and echoing St. Paul in his encounter with the Lord, cried out, "Domini, quid me vis facere?" Lord, what would you have me do? Immediately, as though in reply, came the words, "Turn from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it." These were the words of Psalm 34:15. From that moment on, Norbert no longer wished to continue in his former way of life. He turned back and, at about 35 years of age, began a journey of conversion and penitence, seeking the will of God. Recognizing his need for guidance in the spiritual life, Norbert sought the direction of Abbot Kono at the Abbey of Siegburg. Under his guidance, Norbert prepared to consecrate his whole life to God through holy orders. Toward the end of 1115, he was ordained to the diaconate and the priesthood on the same day by Frederick, Archbishop of Cologne. After his ordination, Norbert withdrew to the Abbey of Siegburg for 40 days of retreat, receiving formation in the exercise of priestly ministry and preparing to celebrate his first Mass. When he returned to Xanten to celebrate it, he was no longer the man who had once been captivated by ambition, but a priest filled with penitence and a burning desire to serve God. Norbert's first Mass in Xanten marked not only a new beginning in his priestly life, but also his first experience of open opposition. In his sermon that day, he spoke of the passing nature of earthly pleasures and of man's duty before God, calling upon the canons of the Collegiate Church of St. Victor to return to a life more worthy of their vocation. Yet his appeal was not welcomed by all. One young cleric went so far as to spit in his face. Faced with such humiliation, Norbert did not respond in anger, but bore it silently and patiently. Over the next 3 years, despite continuing opposition, Norbert persevered in his preaching and in his commitment to the renewal of Christian life. Whenever he needed further support and discernment, he withdrew to the Abbey of Siegburg, sought guidance from the canons at Roda, also known as Klosterrath, or turned to the hermit Ludolf. Through those years, God's call in his life became ever clearer. Norbert could no longer return to the life of security and comfort he had once known, but must devote himself completely to the mission of calling people to conversion. At the Council of Fritzlar in 1118, Norbert was called upon to answer questions concerning his ministry and his newly adopted way of life. Why he preached without having been officially commissioned. Why he bore the austere appearance of one living a religious life while still possessing property. And why a man of noble birth had set aside costly garments in favor of rough clothing. After this questioning, Norbert went to Frederick, Archbishop of Cologne, to surrender his position as a canon together with his ecclesiastical benefices. He sold his own property and distributed the proceeds to the poor, retaining only what was necessary for the celebration of Mass. From that point onward, Norbert journeyed barefoot to St. Gilles to meet Pope Gelasius II and seek papal authorization for his preaching ministry. Pope Gelasius II granted his request, giving him the faculty to preach wherever he deemed appropriate. From then on, Norbert devoted himself fully to the mission of an itinerant preacher, calling people back to God through a life of penitence, reconciliation, and renewal. Norbert's preaching was borne out by his own life of austerity and voluntary poverty. Having renounced the comforts once associated with a privileged life, he clothed himself in the simple garments of a penitent, embraced a rigorous ascetic life, and walked barefoot along wintry roads to preach repentance. Such a life moved many hearts. People sought him out for guidance, and the first disciples gradually gathered around this priest who had chosen poverty. In the early accounts of his life, and in the tradition of the Norbertine Order, Norbert's ascetic life and his mission of preaching repentance called to mind the figure of St. John the Baptist. This association became all the more meaningful when Norbert chose the valley of Premontré as the birthplace of his community. For the first chapel in that solitary place had already been dedicated to St. John the Baptist. From this group of disciples, Norbert sought to form a common way of life, bringing the apostolic life he had pursued throughout his years of preaching into a community firmly rooted in the liturgy and dedicated to the renewal of the Church. While journeying to Reims to meet Pope Calixtus II, Norbert met Bishop Bartholomew of Leon, a meeting that opened the way to Premontre. In 1120, in the valley of Premontre, he laid the foundation for a community living according to the rule of St. Augustine, combining communal prayer, a life of poverty, the discipline of community life, and apostolic ministry. On Christmas Day in 1121, Saint Norbert and his first disciples made their profession, marking the birth of the Canons Regular of Prémontré. From that secluded place, his work began to spread, not through power, but through the strength of a life radically transformed by conversion. Saint Norbert also opened a path of Christian living for those who remained in the world. Among those who sought him out was Count Theobald, who would later become Count of Champagne, a man who was already generous toward the poor and had once desired to join Norbert's community. Norbert, however, discerned that Theobald's vocation was not to leave life in the world in order to become a canon, but to enter married life and continue to use his position and wealth to serve God and to assist those in need. Norbert gave Theobald a fitting rule of life and allowed him to wear the white scapular of the order. On that foundation, Norbertine tradition recognizes the formation of the Third Order of St. Norbert, open to those living in the world who desire to share in the order's spirit of prayer, penitence, and service within their own state of life. At Antwerp in 1124, Saint Norbert confronted the errors left behind by Tancham and his followers. They held that the sacraments, especially the Eucharist, were not valid when celebrated by priests living in concubinage. Through his preaching and a life faithful to the Church, Norbert refuted this error, helping many of the faithful return to a life of communion and true faith. Because of this apostolate, during the Catholic Reformation, he came to be recognized as an apostle of the Eucharist. During the pontificate of Pope Honorius II, the way of life established by Norbert according to the rule of St. Augustine in the communities under his guidance received approval. In 1126, Norbert was chosen as Archbishop of Magdeburg. This office did not lead him back to the privileged way of life he had renounced. On the contrary, he entered his new archdiocese with the same spirit of poverty and penitence. When he arrived in Magdeburg, he was still barefoot. That poverty bore witness to the message he preached. Yet his zeal for reform also aroused opposition. As he began his ministry in Magdeburg, Norbert was determined to put an end to abuses within the archdiocese, to reform the life of the clergy, and to recover church property that had been seized or unlawfully transferred. These actions challenged the interests of many and brought him fierce resistance. Some sought to obstruct him, and 3 attempts were even made on his life. Yet Norbert did not withdraw. Still living in poverty as a shepherd, he persevered in the renewal of clerical life and in defending what belonged to the Church and to the poor. Through these efforts, St. Norbert became part of the movement of church renewal vigorously set in motion by Pope Gregory VII. a movement aimed at restoring discipline among the clergy and safeguarding the spiritual freedom of the Church. Later, during the schism of 1130, Saint Norbert continued to take an active stand in defense of the unity of the Church. Alongside Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, he supported Pope Innocent II against the anti-pope Anacletus II. With his standing as an archbishop and his influence in the German lands, Norbert helped to present and defend the position of Pope Innocent II before Emperor Lothair, thereby strengthening the unity of the Church during a period of profound turmoil. After a life wholly dedicated to preaching, to the renewal of the Church, and to the service of the flock entrusted to him, Saint Norbert died in Magdeburg on June 6, 1134. Many centuries later, in 1582, Pope Gregory XIII granted the Canons Regular of Prémontré permission to celebrate his liturgical commemoration on that very day, with a proper office and an octave. In 1672, Pope Clement X extended the celebration of Saint Norbert to the universal Church. In the current general Roman calendar, Saint Norbert, Bishop, is celebrated as an optional memorial on June 6th, the day on which he completed his earthly journey and returned to God. May the life of Saint Norbert inspire us to choose God above comfort, to remain faithful in times of opposition, and to live each day with a heart renewed by faith. If this story has touched your heart, please subscribe and join us as we continue to discover the lives of the saints and the enduring beauty of the Catholic faith.